Dr. Sadao means operates the injured person. And
Good. You somehow called as learned the main ideas of the topic, but uh, the theme we supposed to know also, and as well as uh, the kind of a connection, right, at the end, at the conclusion. So that also highly essential. Fine, no issue. Let's go for the enemy introduction to this particular topic. So, if you look into this story, the enemy, it is the time of World War, right? An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state. So, and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. So, the question come out here, as we know, means as it is pointed that Americans and Japanese, right? So they had a big rift at them, right? So and it was also found in the from the story that means the doctor was means though completed his education from America, yet he hatred the most to the nation, right? So when it came to him, the question comes out like, should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot, right? So the meaning of the patriot is called as someone who loves to his country. So the story is set during the Second World War. A Japanese doctor finds an American POW uh, at his door, sorry, doorstep. So he is in a dilemma, or you can say that confusion. That being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand over the enemy to the army? So that's what is called as a kind of a confusion in his mind, and that is what means um, throughout the story we find out, and at the end what means what step he took, means whether he saved that man or hand over to the means army. So which is written by Pearl Buck, or you can say that Pearl Sturker, right, or Streakers, Pearl Streaker Buck, right, who was also an American writer and novelist, and she had a Chinese name also that called as a Sai Zhenju. As she spent her childhood in China, being the daughter of missionaries, right, she was awarded with the Pulitzer Prize, which is considering as one of the means, best awards, right, among them. So in 1932, and she got the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year of 1938. So we could say that she was also winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, coming to means, the topic, the enemy. Uh, as we understood that it's a very interesting as well as uh, you know very logical also, logical in the sense like uh, the reason behind the person to save and allowing him, right, the reason behind the person to save and means help him to rescue from that uh, enemy country, or you can say that it's a kind of a means uh, kind of a humanity which has been uh, tried to shown in this. Okay, so let's go to the topic. um, Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. तो यहाँ पे डॉक्टर सदाओ होकी को सदाओ होकी के बारे में ही डिस्कस किया जा रहा है. सो who is considering as the protagonist of this uh, means of this story. So the low square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say so to the little brave boy at his side. Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan, right? Sadao had asked seriously a question that where shall we step from them? Who knows? His father had answered. Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it, right? Now, if you look into this, the beginning of the lesson where the writer introduces means the main character of the story. Second, the writer also describes the settings where the story means took place, right? So setting means referring to the you can talk about Sadao Huki's house, and you can talk about Japanese coast, and also indicating about means the islands yonder, right? That's something called as at some distances in the direction, right? So those of the things are called as the settings. So the settings as well as the protagonist are introduced at the beginning of the uh, topic. So the writer introduces the main character of the story, Dr. Sadao Hoki. So Dr. Sadao's house was, you can say that, situated on the coast of Japan. So, and Dr. Sadao Hoki had been living there since his means childhood age. And he pointed that how the house had a low height and was made of stone, right? So it was set upon the rocky beach, which was the house was set or constructed upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with the pine trees. So the you can consider it as a premise. So the premise had a boundary, and at the edge of the boundary, you would find out the pine trees were tilted towards one side, right? When doctors tilted means moved towards one side. When Dr. Sadao was means a child, so he was means recollecting the thought that when Dr. Sadao was a child, he used to climb up the pine trees. On his visits to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get the coconuts from the trees, right? So, and he would accompany his father to the islands of the South Seas often, and uh, his father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan, right? So pointing towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones that called as a beginning steps towards the future of Japan. Dr. Sadao would question him in a childlike that where would they reach from those islands? So his father would reply that it was not known, as it completely dependent upon the future. The future had no limits. It depended on mankind, how it shaped its future. So how means uh, obviously how the future was created or how the future will be created. So the first question was what means Dr. Sadao questioned him that called as a where would they reach from those islands? So, and the answer of the father was it completely dependent on the future. So, second question means whether it had any limits or not. So, and the answer was what? It had no limits and it completely dependent upon the mankind, how they shape it, the future. So, Sadao had taken this into his mind that whatever he uh, made a conversation with his father. So, as he did everything his father said, so of his father who never joked, so made fun or played with him, but his father who spent infinite pains, that's something called as a hard work upon him, who was his only son, right? So Dr. Sada Hoki was the only son of his father, and his father took a lot of pain to make make him or sustain create him a successful person. Sada knew that his education was his father's chief concern. Whose education? So Sada Hoki's education was his father's main concern. For this region, uh, you could find out that it is stated he had been sent at 22. He had been sent at 22, means it is the age 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. So it means Dr. Sadao Hoki was means a surgeon and also medicine specialist. He had come back at 30 years old, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist, because he was perfecting a discovery which would cause wounds entirely clean. So that was his discovery. So that's why he was called as a scientist, right? So he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And for this possibility, Sadao was being kept in Japan. So that was the means region of his settled in Japan. So he gave a kind of a region behind it. So we could find out uh, he was sent abroad with the armed force as a doctor. So he was retained in Japan, right? Or he stayed in Japan because the old general was suffering. The old general of Japan was suffering from an ailment. Ailment means called as a kind of a pain or disease. So which needed or called as a chronic disease. So which needed to be surgeon or called which needed to be surgery upon in case of emergency. And that's the region when Sadahogi was considered the uh, good doctor, and that's why he was settled there, or he was means uh, he stayed there. So that is what the region for which means because there is a question comes out. The question is called as why did if the means Sadahoki was a means a specialist in medicine and surgery, then why did means he settle himself in Japan, right? So the reason he pointed that means he got the opportunity but he did not go because of the general, right? General of the um, army of Japan was suffering from such kind of a disease, and for his surgery he had to stay, right? So if there is an emergency needed to the general's disease, so that is what is called as an excuse. So clouds were rising from the ocean now, the unexpected warmth. So now it comes to the present day. So clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sada watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be covered about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, who is Hannah? Hannah is his wife, right? Would be waiting for him with the two children. So now we understood the family of the main character, Sadao Hoki. So who have means wife and two children in his house. So we draw at the idea means at this particular means paragraph, that what the author describes or the writer describes, that what means the landscape of the time, right, or at that time. The writer describes the scene, right, outside of Dr. Sadao's house. So as the days were means unusually warm, unexpected warmth is called as unusually warm, and the sea. So the waves of the sea were also cold. The nights became foggy at that time. So, and Dr. Sadao saw the boundary of a means nearby island became invisible, or slowly it is also disappeared. So as it got covered in the mist, so slowly the mist was also coming closer to him. So soon it is also pointed there would be mist all around his house. At that time, he would go back into the house with his where his wife was waiting for him and his two children. But at this moment, what happened? The door opened and she looked out. So a dark blue woolen uh, hal over or howry over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and uh, put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, right? So, but he had waited to fall in love, excuse me, fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. So he wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way. By chance, literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students. And the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Halley's house that night. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. Voluble means someone who speaks a lot, prolixity, or talkative in nature. But he had gone, and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Now, if you look into that, the writer, began the topic with the idea called as Dr. Sadao Hoki, right? About him, the main character, and the place where he settled. Third is called as means his father, um, as Sadao Hoki's father, and then after the family members, and then after means talking about Sadao Hoki's love story, right? So here you would find out that before could go inside, the door opened. So as he was telling about it, and his wife looked out of him. So who is she? She is Hannah. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress, and she lovingly pressed her arm with his, smiled at him. So you would find out and remained silent and stood by him. They had so then after it is stated that means when the kind of scene was going on. So at the same time, the author was means thinking about the past memory, that how did he meet to Hannah, right, and how their love started. So they had met in America. Sadao knew that his father would not allow him to marry a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured that means before falling in love with her, means wanted to know everything about him, right? So, sorry, everything about her. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have means Hannah like girl. And he ensured this before falling in love with that. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met Hannah, where na um, an American professor's house, right? He wondered that means had he not met her, he would not have got a wife all his life. He thought that what the professor and his wife were means very kind, as they were ready to help means foreign students. So even Dr. Sadao, Dr. Sadao means was glad that means the American professor and his wife had accepted this kindness, uh, or he was glad that they had accepted this kindness and went to their house, because it was there that he had met Hannah. Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence, right? That he went to the professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were small. The food was not good, and the professor's wife was very talkative, right? And if he had not gone there that night, so he would not have met Hannah. And at that time, Hannah was a new student, and Sadao had thought that he would love her if at all, means it would be possible for him. Now, he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. So now you would find out that author went to the past thinking about the means love affair, and means came back to the present, and where means he held the hand of means Hannah, so on his arm, and was aware of the pleasure means it gave him. So even though they had been married years, who Hannah and Dr. Sadao married had been, you can say that years, enough to have enough to have the two children, for they had not married heedlessly in America, right? So, or called as means for they had not married carelessly in America. Heedlessly means carelessly. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan. And when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Although Sadao and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. So she laid her cheek against his arm, right? So that is what called as a kind of a moment, and then a kind of a marriage that was arranged. So it was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. So while the thought of past was going on, means their marriage was settled. So, and when they came back to the present situation, what happened means they saw something, right? Both of them, means husband and wife, Hannah and Dr. Sadao, saw something black, something like a spotted mark, right? That come out of the mist, means from the coastal island. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. So that's something called as a jump up, or that called as a thrown out of the ocean. So it seemed to his feet by a breaker, right? So means that the water, how it means hits to his feet. So and his feet becomes the breaker to the water. He staggered. So means even the man was also unsteadily walk, as if about to fall, like a drunk drunken man. So he moved like he could fall a few steps. His body outlined against the mist. Outlined means straight against the mist. His arm above the head, right? Or his arm above his head. Then the curled mist hid him again. Curled mist means that something called as a movement of the fog or mist, snow that hid the man again. So Hannah immediately cried and said, "Who is that?" So she dropped Sadav's arm and they both jumped over, or sorry, they both leaned over. Leaned over means move forward the railing of the veranda. So means the railing was means settled there, and they wanted to see the man properly. So that's why they leaned or moved forward over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw the person again. Who the man was? The man was on his hands and knees crawling, right? The man was on his hands and knees crawling, so was moving slowly, slowly, not even proper walking, right? Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. So, means, ha- what was the picture? The picture was coming out like a black spot from the means coast, right? In the in the mist, right? So mist means called as a white snow. So while the man was coming, he was not in a means a proper way or proper manner of walking. So he was walking like a staggering, right? So after some time, what happened? He was covered himself with the, or he was covered by the mist, right? And sometime after, means the couple found out like how the man was walking, how the man was means not walking, but means you can say that slowly, slowly with his hands, so and knees. He was means you can say that uh, creeping. You can say, right? So on the basis of that means they realized, or not creeping, crawling, right? The man was crawling. So then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. It may be called as he got faint. Faint means unconscious. So a fisherman perhaps, Sadav said. So Sadav thought that uh, obviously means it was the place, means a coastal area. So and fisherman most means often found there. So Sadav said that a fisherman perhaps had so washed from his boat, right? He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, right? So her white sleeves flying. So a mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. The surf beyond, the surf, so we talk about the surf is called as a wave of the water. Beyond the beach was spiked with rocks or moved with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through those waves. He must be badly turned. So, this idea suggests that as the area had villages full of fishermen, so Sadao thought that probably the man uh, who got faint, so was a fisherman, right? Who washed off his boat. So, and that's why Sadao Hoki ran to help that person. Hannah also went with him, or Hannah also followed him. The loose lips of her Hauri. So, what do you mean by Hauri? Hauri is nothing but indicated as a means you could say uh, a loose outer garment, loose outer garment worn over the kimono. So, what is that kimono? Now, kimono is also known as a traditional Japanese garment, right? So, um, uh, you can consider that means he was wearing a traditional Japanese garment and wear the sleeve, which is also moving, or you can say that uh, outer garment means hauri is a loose outer garment, um, which is also known as a traditional garment. So that was means moving because of the breeze of the air, right? Or you can say that because of the wind. So here The writer said that Sadao thought that it was a fisherman and must have washed off his boat, and he went to help that person. Hannah also went to help that person. So, and Sadao thought that this part of the coast was not inhabited as it had dangerous rock on it. So, as the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. So, means Sadao thought that it would, the person would be definitely means injured. So why? Now because means the part was covered with the rocks. So they saw means the couple Sadao and Hannah saw when they came forward toward him that indeed it was so. So the sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through, right? A stain of red soaking through means that called as a blood stain. So when the Japanese couple saw the person or saw the man, and they realized that the person was badly injured, and the sand on which he means he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. So Sadao shouted or surprisingly said, "He is wounded." He made haste to the man, so who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garment. Sadao stopped, right? Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face. Who the person was? It was none other than a white man. Hannah whispered. Hannah slowly said, right? So, means the man who was means who was laying motionless with his face buried in the sand, right? So, and who was having an old cap hung on his head, soaked with the sea water. Dress was also wet and torn. So, he was none other than the American man. So, it was a white man. The white cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut. So, and upon his young and tortured face was a young and tortured face. It seemed like some means anyone had beaten him. Was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Knew nothing that they did for him. So now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers, he started or he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. So when he touched, right, so he found out the blood flesh. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with a powder sometime not many days ago. The man had been shot and not been tended. It was bad chance that the rock had stuck the wound. It was bad chance that the rock had stuck the wound. So you would find out that Sadao was reminded that what? The man was wounded as he had seen blood stains on the sand. Right? As he was a doctor, he moved, he started, searching his, he started looking the wounded area. So he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound, and he felt that the blood coming out of a wound in the lower part of its back. It was and the wounded part was a gunshot. The man had been injured means a few days ago. He had not got any medical help and to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black colored powdery substance on that wounded area. The sharp rock on the shore had entered it, and so it was bleeding. So that's why Hannah whispered again in a means a calm voice, "Oh, how he is bleeding." The mist screened them now completely, and at this time, screened them now completely means mist covered everywhere. And at this time of day, no one came by. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers. So beachcombers means called as a vagrant who makes a living by searching beaches for articles of values and selling them. So you know that those are called as beachcombers. So who found thing or who find things from the beaches. So and what they do, they means sell them. So through that only they sustain. So here, what do you find out? Means Hannah was concerned that the man was injured, right or not? And she stated it in a very solemn voice, calm voice, or a low voice. The mist screened them completely, and at this time of day, no one came back. So, uh, the mist is something called as intensified, very huge. The three of them could not be spotted by anyone. Moreover, the fishermen and the rack pikers did not visit the place at the time of the day. So, Sadao slowly spoken and said, "What shall we do with the man?" Right. So Sadao muttered. So, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could, what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss. He packed the wound with the sea moss. Sea moss means called as uh, the sea. The what do you say that? Um, the living plants in the sea areas. So those are called as a sea moss. And sea moss, or you can say that means a kind of a seaweed, a kind of seaweed that strewed the beach. Strewed the beach means called as that scattered here and there, right, over a place or an area. So when she found he packed the wound with the those of the sea moss which were strewed the beach, or you can say that means scattered everywhere on the beach. The man moaned with pain. Moaned means called as a low cry in pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Stupor means a kind of a unconsciousness. The man was completely unconsciousness, but he was means uh, moaning with pain, or saying like a low cry in pain. So even if he was in a man's unconsciousness state, the best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea. Who said? Sadao said, answering himself. So it's better for them to, or best for them to, means put the person back in the sea. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly that would be best. So Hannah also said steadily, but she continued to look down at the motionless man. Who? Hannah. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. So that's a kind of things will happen. So if they keep the man, take care of the man and keep at home, then they will be arrested. And if they also if they hand over the man to the army or called as a police, so what will happen? Now the man will surely die. So the kindest thing would be to put the man back into the sea, Hannah said. But neither of them moved. So they say that they wanted to put the man back into the sea, but neither of them moved to. Means neither uh, Hannah nor means Sadao. They were looking with a curious repulsion, means called as a hesitation upon the inert figure. Right? Inert figure means called as a motionless, without having any motion. They looked at the man who was not making any kind of a movement. So Hannah slowly spoken, that what is he? There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. So he took up the battered cap. Battered means called as the cap which was torn and worn out cap. Yes, they're almost gone, right? Was the faint lettering a cellar? He said. Was the faint lettering? So, was the faint lettering means the faint is referring to the person who was unconscious. So, it was a question. What the faint, the person who was unconscious, was saying, lettering, a cellar? He said, from an American warship, he spelled it out, US Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. He spelled it out, US Navy. The man was a prisoner of war, right? So now what do you find out? Now they concluded that the man had been taken into captivity during the war and means he has escaped, isn't it? Hannah softly cried, and that is why he is wounded. So in the back, Sadao agreed. The man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. So they hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with the man's resolution or conclusion, come, are we able to put him back into the sea? So means Hannah is asking to Sadao. So Sadao asked, if I am able, are you? If I am ready, then means will you go with me? And I said no, but if you can do it alone. So means that is what Hannah replied in the negative and added that if he would not do it by himself, then she had to help him. Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is what? Now he said that if the man were whole, if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is? But since he is wounded, you also cannot throw him back to the sea. Hannah said, then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. So, as we understood that, Sadao hesitated when uh, the strange thing is, he said, if the man were whole, I could turn. Sada was reluctant in throwing the man into the house, into the sea. He reasoned that if the man was well, he would hand him over to the police. I could turn him over to the police without difficulty, without any hesitation. I care nothing for him. He added that he was not concerned about the man and considered him to be an enemy, as he was an American. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy, right? And he is only a common fellow. And he commented that the injured man was a common man, as his face looked as if he was a foolish person, right? So, uh, but the problem is, Kaldaje means he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was what? That he was wounded. So you also cannot throw him back to the sea, right? Hannah said that if you could not throw him into the sea, then the second option was to carry the person, carry the person to the home, or carry the person to home. So Sadao then stated, what about the servants, right? Because Sada was concerned uh, that the servants would means say something, or Sada means Sada thought that what servants would object as they would shelter an enemy, isn't it? So that's why we must simply tell the servants that we intend to give him to the police. As indeed we must, as indeed we must, Sada. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Now, here you would find out Hannah was means very you can say that fearful. She said that they would tell the servants what now they wanted to hand the person over to the police once the person was once the person is recovered. So she even told means Sadav that what they must do that. They must do that means they must hand over the man to the police. She added that they must consider their children's future and Sadav's position. If they did not hand over a prisoner of war to the police, then they would be in danger. And Sadav replied that surely he would to do so, and he did not think of doing anything else. And finally, they agreed. Together, they lifted the man, right? Sadav and Hannah. He was very light means not that heavy, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time until it is only feathers and skeleton. So, means here you would find out uh, the American man was described how he was a like a fowl. Fowl means chicken, right? Or hen that had been half starved for a long time. Means compared with the hen, not he was a hen. So it seemed like he was not taken the food for a long, right? And it is only feathers and skeletons. So his arms hanging. They means Sadav and Hana carried the person up the steps into the side door of the house. And this door opened into a passage. Means means a little open, and down the passage they carried the man towards in an empty bedroom. So the door opened into a passage and they went down the passage towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadav's father. So, and since his death, the bedroom had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. So who means Sadav and Hana. So put the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man. So uh, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hana, Hana went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft kilt. She hesitated. The kilt was covered with flat silk and the lining was pure white silk. So what do you find out here? The bedroom belonged to Sadav's father, and that particular bedroom had not been used means after the death of Sadav's father. The injured man was put down on the thick mat. Thick mat means big mat or heavy mat, or called as the size of the mat was big on the floor. So the mat that was put on the floor. So the writer describes the room. Everything in the room was Japanese. As Sadav's father disliked foreign things, Hannah went to the cupboard in the wall uh, and took a soft kilt, right? She resisted putting it on the injured man. The kilt was made of silk, so the cloth that was made of a silk and had a beautiful flower print on it, and the lining was made of pure white silk. So means and she did not want to make it dirty. So that's why means she murmured in distress. That what means in a sadness said, he is so dirty. Yes, he had better be washed. Sadav said that yes, I agree that, but he had better be washed or called as a cleaned. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. So the means the matter came here up to this that um, they brought the person into their home and they wanted to make him clean and took the surgery or called as took the treatment or give the treatment to that person, right? So fine, we will keep till this and we'll continue